Who got voted off the Traitors so far and who was murdered? The first 3 episodes of the Traitors 3 were dropped on January 9. Host Alan Cumming introduced 21 players, competing for the $250,000 prize. The Scottish Highlands serve as the backdrop for lots of drama, including the revelation of who the Traitors were and some surprise additional players. Alan chose the Traitors as Danielle Race from Big Brother and Big Brother, Reindeer Games, Carolyn Weiger from Survivor, and Bob the Drag Queen from RuPaul's Drag Race. A 4th traitor was added later, with Boston Rob Mariano from Survivor, The Amazing Race, and Deal or No Deal Island joining the group. Much chaos is ahead for the people residing in the Scottish castle. Who got murdered first on the Traitors 3? Danielle, Bob, and Carolyn had to decide which player to take out first. They decided early that it needed to be a housewife, so they could then blame another housewife. The Traitors murdered Dorinda Medley from The Real Housewives of New York City, RHONY. She was the first person eliminated from the game. Who got banished at the first roundtable for Traitors 2025? The first roundtable for the Traitors 3 was intense. The players had not zeroed in on any traitors yet, and it set up a very split vote. Boston Rob, Wes Bergman from The Challenge, and Derek Levasseur from Big Brother entered the game, but were only audience members for the first roundtable. They were also safe from the vote. When it was the last person's turn to vote, Carolyn Weiger, she had to break a 3-way tie between Robin Dixon from The Real Housewives of Potomac, RHOP, Wells Adams from The Bachelorette and Bachelor in Paradise, and Lord Ivar Mountbatten, a British royal. They each had 4 votes against them. Wells Adams, a faithful, was the first player voted out. Who got murdered second on the Traitors 3? Danielle, Carolyn, Bob, and Rob were tasked with taking out a 3rd player to begin episode 3. Channel Ian from The Real Housewives of Dubai, RHOD, was murdered to create more chaos. Who got banished on the Traitors 3, episode 3? Another roundtable happened during the Traitors 3, episode 3. Bob the Drag Queen was an early target, but Boston Rob turned the target on 2-time Survivor winner Tony Vlachos. Many other people at the table jumped on Rob's bandwagon, leading to a very one-sided banishment vote. Tony Vlachos was the 2nd player banished from the Traitors 3. In summary, Dorinda Medley, Wells Adams, Channel Ian, and Tony Vlachos were eliminated during the first 3 episodes. There are 19 players left competing for the $250,000 prize. Previous seasons of The Traitors are streaming on Peacock, as are Traitors Season 3 episodes that have debuted. In the world of The Traitors, a gripping reality competition that thrives on deception, alliances, and strategy, the stakes are always high. Every contestant must navigate through a maze of mistrust, deception, and betrayal, all while trying to avoid being murdered or voted out by the group. Here's a look at the dramatic events unfolding, with a detailed account of who was voted out and who met their untimely demise. The game began with a diverse group of contestants, all of whom had different backgrounds, motives, and strategies. The main goal was simple: win the game by either staying loyal or deceiving others as a traitor while remaining undetected. However, the twist was that players were either marked as faithful or traitors. The faithful had to figure out who the traitors were, while the traitors had to quietly eliminate the faithful. The first vote. The first vote came after the very first round of accusations and suspicions. In a shocking move, Chloe, a quiet but calculating contestant, found herself in the crosshairs. The faithful team had already started to distrust the quieter members, fearing they might be hiding something. They were right. Chloe was a traitor. In the vote that followed, the group eliminated her from the game, her secret exposed just a few rounds too early. The first murder. The first murder was even more dramatic. Tom, a charismatic and strategic player, had been making strong connections with his fellow contestants, earning their trust. But as the game went on, Tom began to exhibit some behavior that seemed a little too polished, too perfect. The traitors were nervous that his influence would be hard to break, so they took him out. In the middle of the night, while the rest of the group slept. Tom was silently murdered, his face frozen in a look of shock and disbelief. His sudden absence left the remaining players rattled. The next few votes. As the game continued, the group began to hone in on the few players who could be deemed suspicious. Sarah, a player who had kept to herself and avoided the larger group discussions, was targeted in the second vote. While her behavior was completely innocent, her social distancing made others question her motives. At the voting table, Sarah was voted out as a potential traitor. The shock came later, though. Sarah wasn't a traitor. She was a faithful, and her early exit made the faithful group feel more vulnerable. The second murder. Tensions began to rise as more faithful players began to suspect each other, and accusations flew wildly in every direction. But the traitors were quick to strike again. Michael, a strategic player who had been gaining influence among the faithful, was marked for murder. Late one night, as the remaining contestants tried to sleep, Michael was taken out. The murder felt particularly unsettling, as Michael had grown close to several other players, making his absence feel like a gaping hole in the group's dynamics. His departure further complicated the game. The vote that shook the game. In the third round, Emma, who had been one of the more vocal and social players, was brought to the voting table after being accused of manipulation. The faithful team, still reeling from the loss of two strong players, was hesitant to trust anyone. The traitors were working hard to manipulate the narrative, and Emma, unfortunately, was caught in the web of suspicion. Despite her protests, she was voted out. To the shock of everyone, Emma was indeed a faithful. The game took a darker turn that night, with the faithful team now feeling the full weight of their predicament. The third murder. Following Emma's shocking departure, the next murder was even more harrowing. Olivia, a calm and collected contestant, had been quietly aligning herself with some of the strongest players in the game. She'd forged alliances with both faithful and traitor players, which made her a prime target. The traitors, feeling cornered by the growing suspicion surrounding their behavior, took Olivia out in the dead of night. Her murder was the most silent yet. By morning, Olivia was gone, and the group was left to contend with the feeling of unease that had begun to settle over the camp. The next series of votes. As the competition grew fiercer, the lines between faithful and traitors blurred. Ryan, who had been slipping under the radar for most of the game, became the next major target. His silent strategy and ability to stay in the background made him a threat to both teams. After a tense vote, Ryan was kicked out of the game. When it was revealed that Ryan was a traitor, the remaining faithful players were given a brief moment of hope, though the realization that there were still hidden enemies among them was sobering. The fourth murder. The next murder was swift and brutal. Clara, a player who had been cautious but diligent in her attempts to identify the traitors, was caught off guard by the sudden attack. The traitors, who had been keeping their identities well hidden, felt that Clara was beginning to get too close to the truth. Her murder was quiet, but the emotional toll it took on the faithful was immense. Clara's strategic mind was missed, and the faithful team found themselves once again shaken and divided. The tension peaks. With each vote, the remaining players became more paranoid. Alliances shifted constantly, and the sense of who could be trusted was ever-changing. The group was divided into smaller factions, each trying to figure out who was working against them. As the game neared its final stages, Natalie, a player with a sharp intellect and a quiet demeanor, was ousted in a dramatic vote. She had been accused of being a traitor, but in a shocking twist, she was a faithful. The fallout from her exit led to the breakdown of many of the remaining relationships in the game. Final showdown. The final rounds of voting and murder were fraught with tension. The faithful team, though greatly diminished, still believed they had a shot at taking down the traitors. But as the final night came, and with only a few players remaining, the last murder struck. Jake, a long-standing figure of suspicion who had been on the chopping block numerous times, was eliminated. In the final twist, it was revealed that Jake had been one of the traitors all along, and the faithful players had finally triumphed, but at a heavy cost. The journey of the traitors was a whirlwind of psychological warfare, alliances, and gut-wrenching decisions. With each murder and vote, the players' resolve was tested, and the game spiraled into chaos. The traitors had carefully manipulated their way through the competition, leaving their faithful counterparts questioning their every move. In the end, the line between friend and foe became so blurred that even the faithful could no longer be certain who they could trust.